The wind clawed at the timberline as Elias Crane rode higher into the Rockies, where the earth split into spines of granite, and the sky hung pale as bleached bone. He had been riding for 3 days, following a rumor that could not die, that Josiah Pike had stolen the gold cache from Sutter's Gulch and vanished into these mountains. But Elias wasn't chasing gold. He was chasing silence, the kind that comes only when the last echo of conscience has burned away. His horse staggered through knee-deep snow, steam rising from its flanks like smoke from a dying fire. The trail behind him was already vanishing, swallowed by the storm. Somewhere beyond those ridges he believed he'd find truth, or be buried beside it. By dawn, the storm had buried the world in silence. Elias awoke beneath a ledge of snow, the fire long dead, his horse gone. He could feel the mountain breathing, slow, patient, alive. Each sound was amplified by the emptiness, the creak of his saddle, the sigh of wind through dead pine needles. Somewhere, faintly, came the echo of a human cough, but it could have been his imagination. The Rockies had a way of testing faith, and Elias had precious little left to test. Still, he moved on, one frozen boot after the other, into the white maw that waited to swallow him whole. He found a lone pine tree blackened by lightning and made camp beneath it. The wood was damp, the fire reluctant. He spoke aloud to the wind, asking it questions he had once asked God. The only answer was the creak of branches and the distant crack of shifting ice. He remembered Maggie's voice reading scripture by candlelight, her face reflected in the window pane as snow fell beyond. That memory burned brighter than his fire. He knew now the mountain didn't kill men with teeth or stone. It killed them with remembrance. The next ridge rose like a frozen wave. He climbed it on hands and knees, each movement cracking the ice crust beneath his palms. The higher he went, the quieter the world became. Even the wind seemed to stop breathing, and there on the summit he saw something half buried in the snow. The edge of a leather satchel. Inside it, a tarnished compass, still pointing north. He stared for a long moment, knowing it wasn't his, yet it was meant for him to find. Night fell without warning. The cold deepened until sound itself seemed to freeze. Elias built another fire and opened his journal. A few pages left, scrawled with the names of men long dead. He wrote 3 new words. Not alone anymore. The flames hissed as snow began to fall again, covering the words before the ink dried. In the morning, his trail would split. One path up toward the summit, the other down into legend. By the second night, the storm had spent itself, leaving a silence so vast it pressed against the ears. Elias stumbled upon a weather-beaten cabin wedged between boulders, a remnant of some forgotten trapper's claim. Smoke stains still marked the stone chimney, and inside the air reeked of musk and loneliness. He lit a small fire and unrolled his bedroll upon the warped floorboards. Every groan of the timber felt like a memory being forced awake. Outside, the wind moaned through the cracks, but within, the fire hissed like a whispering voice. Elias shut his eyes for only a moment, and in that brief surrender, dream and waking blurred. He heard footsteps on snow, deliberate, pacing. Then the sound of his brother's laughter, soft and impossible. When dawn came, the fire had burned low. Elias rose stiffly and reached for his rifle. But it wasn't where he'd left it. Instead, lying across his pack was a knife, clean and glinting faintly in the morning light. The handle was carved with initials. H.C., his brother's. Elias froze. His breath caught halfway between disbelief and dread. The mountain's silence felt heavier now, like something listening. He called out once, voice hoarse from cold, but the cabin swallowed the sound. Somewhere outside, the snow gave a soft crunch, as if someone had just stepped back into the storm. Elias stepped outside, rifle in hand. The morning sun painted the peaks in pale gold, but no sign of footprints marked the fresh snow, only wind patterns, circling like phantom trails. His horse was still gone. He turned back toward the cabin, and for an instant, swore he saw smoke rising from the chimney. Not the thin trail of his own fire, but thick, gray, and alive. The thought chilled him deeper than the mountain air. It was as though the place breathed, as though it waited. He could feel Josiah Pike's presence in every echo of the ridge. He climbed the slope behind the cabin, scanning the pass with a soldier's instinct. Below, he could see the faint outline of a frozen trail winding through a canyon of blue ice. Then something caught his eye. A distant figure moving along that path, limping slightly, wrapped in a fur coat. The wind carried a faint cry. Half word, half moan. Elias tried to call out, but the sound died in his throat. The figure stopped, turned toward him, and vanished into the glare. For a long while, Elias stood motionless, heart hammering, wondering if the mountain had shown him a ghost or a warning. That night, Elias rebuilt the fire and waited. The storm's calm had a strange pulse, a rhythm beneath the silence, as if the mountain were breathing in time with him. He placed the knife beside him, watching its reflection flicker in the flames. Each crackle sounded like footsteps drawing closer. He thought of Nagy's hands on his shoulders years ago, urging him home from war. But this time there was no home left to return to. Outside, the wind rose suddenly, carrying with it a single echo that froze his blood. Laughter, familiar and cruel, sweeping through the pass like a promise. The third day dawned beneath a blood-orange sky, the air thin and sharp as cut glass. Elias left the cabin before sunrise, following what appeared to be human tracks leading east. The prints moved in a looping pattern, as if their maker had circled back upon himself again and again. Elias followed them for hours. Through drifts waist-deep, the landscape turning stranger with every step. Trees warped by wind, snow stained faintly with rust-colored ice. The sense of pursuit grew unbearable. He began to whisper aloud, convincing himself that Josiah Pike must still be alive, that it was his boots he followed. But the longer he tracked, the clearer it became. The prints matched his own. By midday, the forest thickened into a maze of dead timber. Elias's eyes darted at every shifting shadow, every cracking branch. Once he glimpsed movement between the trees, a flash of fur, or perhaps a man's coat. He lifted his rifle, pulse quickening, but the shape melted into the fog. The mountain seemed alive now, its silence punctured by faint murmurs that rose and fell like voices just beyond hearing. He thought of Pike again, that wily trapper who once laughed at fear itself. Perhaps this was Pike's revenge, to lure him into madness where bullets and prayer held no power. As dusk gathered, Elias came upon a clearing where the snow lay untouched, except for a single circular depression, as if something heavy had rested there. In the center, he found the ashes of a campfire still faintly warm. He knelt and sifted the coals with his fingers, the smell of burned pine sharp and bitter. Beside the ashes lay a scrap of torn cloth, stitched with the initials JP. The world tilted then, memory flooding his chest. Josiah's laughter, their argument over gold, the gunshot that split them apart years ago. He realized that some debts do not stay buried, even under mountains of snow. That night he dreamed of the war, the smoke, the screams, the flash of rifles in the dark. But when he woke, the sound still lingered. A distant howl echoed across the pass, joined by others, rising and falling like a dirge. Elias's pulse hammered as he scrambled to his feet. The wolves were near. He could sense them moving through the snow, circling. He fired once into the night. The echo boomed through the valley, but when it faded, something else answered. A voice, human, low and mocking, calling his name from the trees. The night tore itself apart with sound. Wind, gunfire, and the maddening echo of footsteps that weren't. His Elias ran through the trees, chasing the voice that taunted him, that called him brother. At last, in a ravine half filled with ice, He caught a glimpse of a man's silhouette ahead, broad-shouldered, wrapped in furs. "Pike!" he shouted, though the name froze in the air. The figure turned slowly, revealing nothing but a hollowed face of ice and shadow, before vanishing into the drift. When Elias reached the spot, there were no prints, no trail, only the whisper of wind and the taste of fear in his mouth. The next dawn broke without color. The world had turned monochrome. Snow, stone, and sky blended into one endless sheet of white. Elias trudged onward, the cold chewing through his coat and bone alike. His rifle felt heavier now, not with weight, but with the pull of memory. He found a narrow gulch, its frozen stream glinting like steel beneath thin sunlight. Kneeling, he brushed snow from the ice, and there, beneath the surface, something shimmered. Gold. He stared until his breath fogged the vision, uncertain whether he was seeing truth or madness. The mountain was offering him what he came for, but in its reflection he saw his own face, cracked by time and terror, and realized the offer came with a price. The discovery ignited something feral within him. Elias began clawing at the ice with the knife, shattering it piece by piece. Each strike echoed across the canyon like gunfire. The shards sliced his palms, blood smearing the gold beneath. For a moment he laughed, a wild, broken sound swallowed by wind. But as he leaned closer, the ice revealed shapes beneath. A skull, a frozen hand clutching at the vein, the remains of another prospector claimed by the same hunger. Elias dropped the knife, chest heaving. The mountain did not hide its warnings. It displayed them, gleaming like treasure. He staggered from the creek, delirium gnawing at reason. Every tree seemed to tilt toward him, every gust whispering his name. He could no longer tell if the voice calling from the ridges was Josiah Pike's or his own. The gold glittered in his mind even as his vision dimmed. He pressed onward through the pass, searching for higher ground. But each turn of the path led him back to the same grove, the same rocks, the same frozen stream. Time had folded in upon itself. He was trapped inside the mountain's memory, condemned to repeat the same steps until the snow took him whole. As night fell, he found shelter in a narrow cave, glowing faintly from reflected moonlight. He built a small fire, though his hands shook too violently to strike the flint. The warmth brought back images unbidden. Maggie's smile, the curve of her hair in lamplight, the sound of her laughter before the war stole it from him. He whispered her name once, twice, until the wind carried it away. Shadows moved along the cave wall, shifting like figures dancing in the flame's edge. One shadow stepped forward, tall and familiar, Josiah Pike, face half illuminated, grinning through the smoke. He rose, trembling, staring into the darkness. "What do you want?" he whispered, though he knew the answer. The air thickened with heat as the fire flared, then dimmed to embers. From beyond the cave, mouth came a glow. Not moonlight, but the cold gleam of reflected gold. Drawn forward, Elias stepped into the open, the storm dead still around him. Across the snow, a trail of light led upward toward the summit, winding like molten veins through the night. He followed, boots crunching in perfect rhythm with unseen steps ahead. The mountain no longer resisted him. It guided him. The storm returned without warning, descending upon the high ridge like the judgment of God. Elias climbed toward the summit, the wind clawing at his face, the gold-lit path fading beneath snow. Ahead, a figure stood still against the tempest, cloaked in furs, broad-shouldered, unmoving. "Pike!" Elias shouted, the word torn from his throat and cast into the gale. The figure turned, and through the swirling ice he saw Josiah Pike's face, older, hollow-eyed, mouth twisted in something between pity and laughter. "You came too late." Pike's voice carried across the wind. "The mountain already took what was yours." Elias raised his rifle. In that moment, the storm itself seemed to hold its breath. They circled each other, ghosts in a sea of white. Every gust erased their footprints as soon as they formed. Pike laughed, low and bitter. "You still think you're hunting gold," he shouted. "But it's just you, Elias. You and the hole you dug in your own soul." The words hit harder than the wind. Elias fired once, the shot echoing off the cliffs. But when the smoke cleared, Pike still stood, untouched. "You can't kill what the mountains already claimed," Pike said. His voice seemed to come from every direction at once. Elias dropped to his knees, gasping, the wind screaming like a choir of lost men. The rifle lay empty beside him. Pike approached slowly, boots silent on the snow. "You should have stayed with her," he said. The voice softened now. Familiar. Too familiar. As he drew closer, his face seemed to change, shifting between Pike's and another, his brother's, Henry. The one had left to die at Shiloh. Elias stared, transfixed as memory and madness fused into one vision. "I came back," the apparition whispered. "You never did." He screamed then, not from fear but from defiance, and lunged forward. The two men collided, their struggle half seen through the storm. The rifle cracked underfoot. Fists met bone. The sound of snarling wind drowned all reason. At last, a single shot rang out. Then, silence. When the snow settled, only one figure remained standing. Elias staggered backward, clutching his side, eyes wide and unfocused. Before him, Pike's body lay still, half covered by drifting snow. But as Elias reached down to touch him, the form dissolved into frost, scattering into the wind like ash. Elias sank to his knees, breath rasping shallow. Around him the wind slowed, the storm's voice fading into stillness. Snow began to fall in delicate silence. He looked to the horizon, the gold vein beneath the ice now buried, the mountain cleansed of its shimmer. He whispered Maggie's name one last time, and for the first time in years, felt warmth, not from fire, but from surrender. The snow rose higher, covering him like a shroud. Somewhere far below, the first light of dawn spilled over the peaks. In that glow, the mountain seemed to sigh, not in victory, but in remembrance. 2 weeks after the storm, the mining town of Hesper's Gulch whispered his name like a prayer and a warning. Sheriff Aaron Dodd gathered a small search party. 3 men hardened by winters, driven by equal parts duty and superstition. The mountains loomed in the distance, silver under a cold dawn. Dodd had known Elias Crane once, back when both were soldiers, and the memory of that quiet man's eyes haunted him more than the missing gold ever could. As they rode toward the high passes, Dodd felt the chill deepen, not from weather, but from the weight of something waiting in those peaks. Something that watched, patient as stone. The first signs appeared 3 miles up the trail. A broken length of rifle stock half buried in frost, and beside it, a single spent cartridge gleaming like a coin in the snow. One of the men crossed himself and muttered that they ought to turn back. Dodd said nothing, only examined the wood's engraving, the initials EC, still faintly visible beneath ice. The wind carried the echo of something faint, a whistle, maybe, or the low moan of the pass. Dodd pocketed the shell and motioned the others forward. He knew the mountain wasn't finished speaking. They found the cabin by mid-afternoon, buried to its eaves in white. Inside, the air was dry and still, as though sealed by time. A half-burned log rested in the hearth, and beside it, a journal open to the last page. Dodd brushed off the soot and read aloud the final entry, words faint but legible. Not alone anymore. The room seemed to contract around him. the fire's ghost flickering in his mind. He could almost hear Elias's voice between the lines. Not madness, but acceptance. Outside, the wind rose suddenly, as though stirred by the sound of his reading. They followed faint signs from the cabin, boot prints, half filled by snow, leading toward the high ridge. As they climbed, the air thinned, the world narrowing to sound and breath. One deputy called out suddenly. Ahead, beneath a snowbank, lay a tattered coat frozen stiff, and beside it, a boot print ending at the mouth of an ice cave. The impression was sharp, unweathered, as if made only hours before. Dodd stared at it for a long time, the hairs on his neck rising. Then from within the cave came a sound. The distant metallic click of a rifle hammer being drawn back. They never found a body. The cave descended no more than 30 feet before ending in solid ice, smooth as glass. But something had been there. The remains of a small fire, a dent in the snow where a man might have slept. Dodd placed his hand on the frozen wall. Beneath the ice, he swore he saw a shape. A man's outline, faint, suspended in the cold. He blinked, and it was gone. When they left the mountain that evening, the wind rose again, carrying what sounded almost like a voice calling from far above. Dodd did not look back. Years passed, and the snows of the Rockies buried the memory of that winter beneath layers of silence. The mines closed, the trails shifted, and men spoke of Elias Crane only in low tones over saloon fires. They said the mountain kept him body and soul. Some called him a ghost, others said he'd found gold and gone mad with it. But the old ones of Hesper's Gulch swore that, on nights when the wind ran east over the ridges, you could still hear his rifle crack once through the dark. A warning, or perhaps a reminder that the mountain never forgets its own dawn. Sheriff Dodd grew old in that town. He kept Elias's journal locked in his desk, its pages stiff with frost and time. Sometimes he'd open it just to read the last words again, tracing them with a trembling finger. He never told anyone what he thought he saw in the ice that day. He only knew that when winter came and the mountain winds began their mournful song, he felt a presence in every gust. Not threatening, but watching, guarding something older than man or gold. The miners' sons grew into men who no longer remembered the war or the gold rush, but they knew the story. They carried rifles into the high timber, whispering Elias's name for luck before setting traps. Some returned with pelts and tales of footprints appearing beside their fires, disappearing by dawn. One young prospector claimed to have seen a man's shadow standing watch above his camp, silent, unmoving, until sunrise erased it. When asked to describe him, he said only, "Looked like someone who stayed too long." In spring, when the thaw revealed what winter had hidden, the mountain sent down its gifts: pieces of gear, a torn coat, a broken knife. Each artifact found near the same creek where gold once glimmered. The townsfolk gathered them in quiet awe, laying them in the church vestibule like relics. No one dared to claim them. To touch what belonged to Elias Crane was to invite his solitude, and solitude was the truest curse the mountain gave. And yet, some nights when the moon burns white over the peaks, hunters still pause, mid-step, certain they hear the crunch of boots in snow beside them. They turn. Nothing. Nothing. Only wind, only shadow. The Rockies remember. Somewhere above the tree line where the storms are born, a lone figure keeps his vigil. Elias Crane, soldier, prospector, penitent, forever walking the ridge between life and legend. The mountain's chosen son, guarding the silence he once sought.